This is your boy Alex. I'm back. Pretty much the day is pretty much over with, and we're gonna do a YouTube video, which is gonna probably take maybe towards the end of the day to do. And this one is continuing my series of professional wrestling. I did not anticipate that I would get 196 views for Sex Game, the top 11 sexiest women in wrestling. I mean, like, that was like not anticipated. Like, I had no idea it was gonna be that good of a video and that well received. So let me say thank you to my national audience. Thank you. Without you guys, I would not have the motivation and the confidence to do that video. It took me like almost 14 years to watch a lot of wrestling and decide who should be on that list, who should not be on that list. It was a very complicated video to make, and there were some people who did not like the fact that China was at number one, Nia Jax was at number two. It's like what my mom said, no matter how hard you try, you cannot make everybody happy. That was just one category of women. I didn't even get a chance to make a video called The Women Who Won the Most Championships in Wrestling. So that's still going to be like the season finale. So this one, we're going to be focusing on the big men of professional wrestling. So this is the second category. We're going to do the giants, okay? I might change the title and call it the giants in wrestling or the big men. I might do both with a hyphen. Some were considered big, some were considered giants in professional wrestling. So it's the top 10 wrestlers that were considered giants, okay? Now, coming in at number 10 is the Great Khali. He's from India, and he's like 7'4", 420 pounds of rock granite muscle. Now, he didn't start doing professional wrestling until between 1999 to 2004. He wrestled in Japan, and as the legend says, he was wrestling tigers. Like, he was wrestling tigers for sport. And some guy that was famous, a retired athlete, went to India for vacation and saw this guy and found out he was 7'4", 420 pounds, and discovered him and tried to get him to do basketball, but he wasn't good at basketball. Then they decided, let's just have him do wrestling, and he ended up doing wrestling. I saw him on an episode of SmackDown in 2006 after Mark Henry lost to the Undertaker the week before WrestleMania. And then when Undertaker had fought Mark Henry in a match, Great Khali made his entrance. Like, when I saw him, the first thing I thought was, is this Godzilla? The way he came in was huge. He had this intimidating presence. And he couldn't speak English, so he would scream at you. And Undertaker's like, okay, this guy ain't nothing. I fought plenty of big men before. And he gave the Undertaker a karate chop. And when he gave him a karate chop, you want to say, okay, that's scripted, that's story. Ain't nobody gonna do nothing like that. And when the Undertaker was knocked out unconscious, this was serious. And the weeks followed when we got to Judgment Day. Undertaker tried to fight, and the guy didn't budge. That was the first time I saw somebody of that size, that intimidating. And I remember my best friend looked at me and said, you want to be a wrestler, huh? That's what you're going to have to deal with. Somebody of that magnitude. And he's right. And eventually, The Undertaker had to fight him 4 times just to get a win. Then when he became champion, if anyone could end Undertaker's reigns as champion, he did. Everyone was trying to beat Great Khali when he became heavyweight champion. Everybody had shots. Like, Batista would lose to him. John Cena would ultimately be the one to beat him. Like, Undertaker could not beat him. But Undertaker was the first one to break his undefeated record, and then other guys would take their shots at Great Khali. Like, it was a shock to me to see that it took Undertaker 4 tries to beat this guy. Like, when he fought Kane and Kevin Nash and Sycho Sid, all it took was 1 or 2 matches. But when it took him 4 times to beat Great Khali, the guy did become a champion twice. The guy did participate in battle royals. Now, what makes his career disappointing is that he only stayed with the company for about 7.5 years. He was once on SmackDown, then he was once on Raw. Then he was on ECW, and then he became a jobber. And it's sad to see what they've done to his career because Great Khali had so much promise and potential that I don't think anybody knew how good he could have been. Like, yeah, his title reigns lasted 4 or 5 weeks, and then they would take the belt off of him, put it on John Cena, put it on Batista. There was his matches against Triple H. And he ended up becoming a jobber. He ended up losing to all your big stars when he could have been the next Andre the Giant. He could have been the next Big Show. Like, anytime they had a big monster matchup on Raw or SmackDown, one of his most memorable matches is him losing to the Big Show and the match ending in disqualification. Like, you remember when Brock Lesnar and Big Show fought and then the ring went boom, and then when he did it again, it repeated again. And then they made this thing called the Pajami Prison, right? Undertaker was supposed to be in that match, and instead we ended up getting The Undertaker fighting someone else, and Big Show inside the Pajami Prison. So it's like we were gonna see what they could have done with his character. Then they made him just become the Pajami Giant that dance and sing, and it's like, what are you doing to his character? It's like you start him off like a monster, and then you made him into a joke, and then it's like we never seen from him ever again. Then he went back to Japan. He got in athletic shape, and he looked like he still could have another run in him. Will he make a return to the WWE? I don't know. That remains to be seen. He's in his 30s, early 40s. Coming in at number 9 is Scott Hall, or you can just say the bad guy, Razor Ramon. You take the concept of being Cuban, a cigar, and copy Tony Montana from Scarface, and you get Razor Ramon. Now, Scott Hall was a guy that was already doing professional wrestling in the late 80s. He wrestled in territories like AWA, the NWA territories for Jim Crockett Promotions. And basically, he was wrestling, and nobody knew who he was. And the fact that they said make his character great, it just stands out that he was popular. And he won championships. Like, he became a tag team specialist. And he teamed up with Kevin Nash before he got into the WWE, back when it was called WWF, and way before he got to WCW. A lot of people don't realize that he was already on the professional circuit. He was there with Lex Luger, whose real name is Lawrence Luger. He was there with Undertaker when he was called Mean Mark. Mark Calloway's real name, not Undertaker is his stage name, but Mark Calloway's his real name. He was there with all of those guys. He was there with Macho Man Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan. So he was already friends with them in the 80s before we got to the 1990s, and Vince McMahon was just dominating the promotion in the wrestling scene. By the time we got to 91, 92, his interest was badass. You heard the glass breaking. They showed the one clip from Scarface. He came out with the theme song, the cigar in his mouth, and it's like he came with the skull, got in the ring, did his thing, wrestled, beat your ass for 10 minutes, left, and got ready for the next match. Some of his best wrestling matches was Razor Ramon versus Bret Hart. He wrestled him for the championship. He lost, but in that match, he showed that he could fight if he had to. Like, he could wrestle, he could entertain. If you wanted him to do a technical match, he could do it. And he was like 6'6", 250 pounds. Like, this was a big guy. And the fact that he could wrestle Bret Hart, that was a technical wrestler, was a shock to me. Because he would always be in power matches. Power matches is like you're a big guy and all you can fight is big guys. And then finally, he got a comment from Bob Backlund backstage. You can't wrestle Bret Hart. And Razor said, all right, I'm going to go wrestle Bret Hart. He lost the match, but what stuck out, he became a 2-time tag team champion. He became a Intercontinental champion. And then the greatest match he had was at WrestleMania, the legendary ladder match with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania. It stands out to this very day. The fact that he was willing to wrestle Shawn Michaels, and they created a storyline where he was Intercontinental champion because Shawn Michaels didn't want to defend the title. When Shawn Michaels came back from injury, Razor Ramon had a chance to make history. He became the undisputed Intercontinental Champion. And then his next match was against Bret Hart again in Champion versus Champion. And then he had matches with Big Daddy Cool Diesel, Sycho Sid. He teams up with 123 Kid, whose real name is Sean Walterman, who later would become Six and Six Pac. And basically, he had good runs in the WWE. I mean, he had so many high-profile matches. He was primetime television. He would be tag team with Lex Luger. He would tag team with 123 Kid. You could do those matches. And he became a part of a thing called The Clique, where it was Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, X-Pac, and he got almost in trouble because they broke out of character in 1995, and Vince McMahon was not happy about that. Like, he was very furious that you broke out of character in front of millions of people. The next time I saw him, he was on Monday Nitro, and they hadn't even wrote a script for Scott Hall. All of a sudden, we saw him come into the building talking about Macho Man Randy Savage, and you didn't know if he was trash talking or if he was saying it for real. Because he was in there saying, hey Chico, that punk can't get into the building. I can go where I want, how I want. And for almost 4.5 weeks, he wasn't wrestling. Then comes Kevin Nash, and then they create the Outsiders. They come in, they crash the scene at WCW, and at this point, we were in the Monday Night Wars. It was WWE versus WCW. Like, as a kid, we thought it was good entertainment, but it was serious. It's one company trying to put the other competitor out of business. You turn on USA Network, you got Monday Night Raw trying to compete with Monday Night Football on the primetime television. You turn around and you see WCW Monday Nitro. They're on Ted Turner's network, Turner Classic, and you had a three-way tie because you had the NBA, the NFL, and then you had two wrestling companies on at the same time competing for the bragging rights to be the king of wrestling. And when they created the NWO, you could see that it was the biggest impact. In fact, they were competing with DMX. Not DMX, but they was competing with D-Generation X, my bad. It's a mistake, but I corrected it. You know what I mean, DX. And basically, they became a big group. And it was NWO versus WCW. And all of this was to try to compete with Vince McMahon. They would steal talent from WWE and lower them over to WCW. All of a sudden, here's Kevin Nash and Scott Hall making $150,000, $250,000, where they were in WWE just making $5,000 or $6,000. You in WCW making $100,000 or $250,000, and that's what kind of upset Vince McMahon at the time. People that were there back then witnessed this Monday Night War. Like, we had never seen two companies go against each other on prime time. And Scott Hall was a big part of the rise and fall of WCW. Scott Hall. Now, the only thing that hurts him from getting higher on the list is alcohol substance. The guy loved his alcohol. The guy kept getting in trouble with the police. And the reason why he never became a champion in WWE was because he kept getting in trouble with the Willis policy. He was good enough to become a 3-time Intercontinental Champion, 3-time Tag Team Champion. He got in the main events. He just could not win the championship. And when he got to WCW, it was like the same thing again. He managed to become a 3-time WCW Tag Team Champion. Then he managed to make himself a United States Television Champion. But he had an impact because he's the one who cost Goldberg his undefeated streak. Like, when no one could beat Goldberg, he helped Kevin Nash give Goldberg his first loss. So it was significant. And then to come back to WWE in the 2000s, just Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Hulk Hogan to get Stone Cold, and they set the story up for what? Hulk Hogan versus The Rock, one of the greatest matches at WrestleMania. We will get to that later in another category. But the one thing that's missing from his resume is he never got to be world champion in WCW, And if it did happen, it came much later, where he lay down and let Kevin Nash win the belt. Scott Hall had opportunities to take out champions to be a champion. He had good profile matches in WCW. He wrestled Diamond Dallas Page. He clashed with Sting and Lex Luger. He fought Sycho Sid. There was a lot of high profile matches in WCW. And he also, if it weren't for his exposure in WCW, we probably would have never noticed people like Eddie Guerrero, Perry Sander, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero's cousin Chavo, Rey Mysterio. We would have never recognized those talents. That was the good thing about NWO. It was helping out the WCW talent get over. And these are things that Scott Hall never gets credit for. But the one thing that's missing from his resume is not winning a championship. I think that would be the one thing that would complete his list. It's just unfortunate that he goes down in history not winning the big one. Coming in at number 8 is Kevin Nash, or call him Big Daddy Cool Diesel. 7'1", 300 pounds, a force of nature. From Detroit, Michigan. Not the type of guy you want to get into a fight in a barn. If you've seen how huge he is, you get your ass whooped. The man was so intimidating when he got into the ring that they took the character, the Renegade, from the television show and showed the truck in the background. And at that time, he was already wrestling. He came in the late 80s, 86, 87, and he was already wrestling for WCW under different names. And he had already tag teamed with Mark Calloway before he became The Undertaker. And a lot of people don't realize that he was already wrestling with these big stars. Then he left and went to WWE, back when it was called WWF, and he showed up in 92. And one of the interesting things about Big Daddy Cool Diesel's character was, you got a man to talk, you got a guy to wrestle, and he had wrestling ability, okay? He wasn't just this big power guy. He could wrestle. The guy knew how to put you in counter holds, body slam, break out of cold holds, and he had good technical matches with Bret Hart, Owen Hart, God rest his soul, rest in peace. He had good technical matches with Bret Hart and Owen Hart. And when he became the world champion, it was like a crowning moment. He had finally gotten over with fans. He had high-profile matches as champion. He wrestled Bam Bam Bigelow. He would wrestle Lex Luger, who almost took the title from him. He defeated Yokozuna. Then he beat Shawn Michaels. And then he had incredible rivalry matchups with Bret Hart, where they would go back and forth. And then he had a match with The Undertaker, and then he would cost them the championship. And you could see how he went from November of 1994 to November of 95 as the longest reigning champion. He would literally beat everyone to hold on to the belt. And when you hear stories how he was not happy, it was because there was a lot of pressure on him to carry that company. There be days where you could not get an autograph or take a picture, and this was the world champion. And when they created the storyline of he, laid out Shawn Michaels and basically was mad because Shawn Michaels had won the Royal Rumble in 95 and then eliminated him in the 1996 Royal Rumble, you could kind of see that they had created a new rivalry. Shawn Michaels versus Diesel. And he lost that match, and before that was over, he would have a match with Undertaker at WrestleMania that same year. And that kind of ended his time in the company. Going to WCW is where he really made a major impact. He got to be World Heavyweight Champion 3 times, Tag Team Champion 4 times, the Television and U.S. Champion 3 times, and he had high-profile matchups. He got to wrestle Hulk Hogan. They did a storyline where the NWO got so powerful story-wise, they broke into 2 groups. The black and white NWO would be Hulk Hogan and Macho Man. Then somehow Macho Man would switch sides, and the black and red would be the Wolfpack NWO. And Kevin Nash showed that he could do technical wrestling. When he started challenging people like Dean Malenko, Chris Jericho, and Eddie Guerrero to these technical matches, we got to see that he could actually wrestle on a level that made him legitimate. What he could not do in WWE, he got to do in WCW. He got to wrestle Goldberg, and Scott Hall helped him break the winning streak, and Kevin Nash became the first guy to give Goldberg his first loss. He got to wrestle Sting. He got to wrestle Lex Luger, Scott Steiner. Then he had a rivalry with Booker T that's the stuff of legends. They don't like to really talk about those matchups, but anytime Kevin Nash would run his mouth in a storyline, Booker T came. And they clashed. And Booker was taking it to him in those matches. And some of the best matches he had were technical wrestling matches. One of the most funniest matches is when he lost to Rey Mysterio before he started putting the mask on in WWE. WCW, you got to see what he actually looked like without the mask. And Kevin Nash lost the match, and Lex Luger was like, "You're supposed to win that." But he got fined $250,000 because he went to the projection truck and beat up Rey Mysterio for real and got in trouble for it. Like, we thought it was story-wise. It wasn't story-wise. It was real. It was like, you did some stuff that you had no business doing, and then to make matters worse, he got fined. And then that same year, Triple H and Billy Gunn and Road Dogg Jesse James and Six Pac, back when he was X-Pac, decided to go to WCW and try to mess with WCW. And Kevin Nash was a part of that storyline. And basically, Kevin Nash had told Eric Bischoff backstage, they're going to come get us. And one of the biggest things that never happened in wrestling, it would take like 20 years to happen. The NWO versus DX. Like, look how big that could have been in the 1990s in the prime of professional wrestling. As a kid, we wanted to see WWE versus WCW live on pay-per-view. We wanted to see NWO versus DX. It was that anticipated. People was like, when are we going to see Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Goldberg? Those are things that we always talk about, and they never happen. It was nice that when they got to WWE, but we never got to see those matches fold the way they should have happened. And Kevin Nash was a big part of that success. And coming back to the WWE, he still was able to compete with younger men. Like, normally when you get in your 30s and your 40s, you're past your physical prime, but he could take the fight to you. Like, if you wanted to get physical and get serious with Kevin Nash, you got your ass whooped. Like, that's one guy I would not want to pick a fight with, because I might be a big, strong guy, and I might be able to get a couple of hits in, but you get jackknife powerbomb, you're not getting up from it. He's like one of those guys that look at you one time and be like, "You sure you want to fight me?" And you'll probably have to think a long, hard think about that. Like, this ain't no guy you want to just mess with in the ring. Like, inside, outside the ring, he will fight you. Like, he's actually gotten into fights with wrestling fans because they tried to test him, and when they found out he was for real, it's like, it's not funny. Because he's the type of guy that'll get you. And then when he came, like, later in the 2000s, we could have had Kevin Nash versus CM Punk, because he whooped CM Punk butt real good. He manhandled John Cena in the Royal Rumble in 2012, which I was shocked that in his 50s he could still get you. So it's like he's not a joke. He's the real deal. Now, that's a guy that won championships both WWE, WCW. He got into the Hall of Fame. It took a while. The one thing that I don't like what they do with Kevin Nash is that they don't try to talk about his reigns a little bit more and how he was able to just be a technical wrestler. It was your tall, go entertain, and that's it. When he got to WCW, he showed he could do a lot more than just entertain. So that's why